The hallway of Westwood High School always buzzed with the low thrum of adolescent energy. Lockers slamming in a discordant chorus, sneakers squeaking against the polished linoleum floors, and the murmured gossip of a small-town community that prided itself on tradition. On this particular morning, Alex Carter, 19 years old, perpetually defiant in manner, and far more world-weary than any teenager, had a right to be felt all eyes on him. He slung his backpack over one shoulder, sparing a quick glance at a cluster of cheerleaders who whispered behind their palms. Once upon a time, he might have asked them what was so fascinating. Now he carried a different burden. He was, to most people, an outlier, someone who wore chipped nail polish on certain days, a battered leather jacket on others, and who never quite fit the mold carved out by Westwood's conservative expectations. Unknown to almost everyone, Alex privately identified as a transgender woman, a truth he guarded with fierce determination. Many in this conservative Ohio town found even his short hair and rebellious streak unacceptable, so the idea of revealing a deeper, more intimate truth felt like a recipe for absolute disaster. Yet it was not just this hidden gender identity that set him apart. It was also his secret relationship with Jamie, a lanky, soft-spoken boy from the drama club. Jamie was sunshine incarnate, gentle eyes, a warm laugh, and an unwavering belief in the importance of being true to oneself. With him, Alex felt safer than he'd ever felt, though the constant undercurrent of fear never left him. A single slip could expose them both to the vicious cruelty of rumor-hungry classmates and disapproving adults. That fear proved justified when, late one afternoon, Alex found himself in the locker room after track practice had finished. Jamie, always the thoughtful one, had lingered to check on him, sensing that Alex's mood had been particularly turbulent lately. They thought they were alone in that hidden corner behind the rows of lockers, speaking in hushed tones about private hopes. The moment turned tender. A gentle exchange of comfort, a kiss that could have been fleeting but felt monumental. Unbeknownst to them, a hidden camera had been placed near the overhead ventilation duct. There was no time to wonder who would go to such lengths or why they would target Alex specifically. The school's new disciplinary measures under Principal Hargrove had grown increasingly invasive, but few students suspected it went this far. This single forbidden moment, intimate and vulnerable, was captured, stored, and eventually leaked to the very last people Alex wanted to see it, the entire community of Westwood High. Within hours, the footage made its way into a private group chat among faculty and select parents, fueling a moral panic. Principal Hargrove, a staunch advocate of traditional values, believed discipline was the cornerstone of education. He clung to old-fashioned ideals with an almost religious fervor, and when he saw the video, his self-righteous indignation ignited. By the time Alex arrived home that evening, the entire Carter household was in upheaval. His parents, Margaret and Thomas Carter, were devoutly religious and already teetered on the edge of shame due to Alex's rebellious ways. The video sent them catapulting into the darkest corners of their worst fears. They demanded answers the moment he walked through the door. The living room lights felt glaring, almost like an interrogation spotlight. Alex tried to form excuses, tried to deny what he knew they must have seen, but the truth was too transparent. His mother's voice quivered with shock. "How could you shame us like this?" she nearly shouted, clutching her robe at her neck, as though trying to hide from a storm of scandalous judgments. In one breath, she was quoting scripture. In another, she was threatening to cut him off from the family if he didn't repent. Alex's father paced the length of the room, biting the inside of his cheek so hard that Alex was certain he tasted blood. And then, as if the betrayal of his parents wasn't enough, they dropped a cruel anvil of a question. "Is this who you are now? A deviant boy who kisses other boys?" The accusation hung in the air, dripping with horror and condemnation. That moment, it felt like 1,000 nightmares converged into reality. Every reason Alex had to keep his identity hidden was justified tenfold. But Alex refused to cower. Despite the tremor in his voice, he tried to defend himself. "It's not a phase," he said. I'm not what you think I am." It was the closest he came to sharing the truth of his identity, that inside, he wasn't just a boy with a wild streak. In every sense, he longed to live openly as a girl. The version of himself he felt was authentic. Their reaction was immediate. His father stepped forward, eyes blazing with judgment. "So you're telling us you want to be a woman? Is that what this is?" He spat the word woman as though it burned on his tongue. His mother's gasp was more of a strangled sob. Before Alex could utter another word in defense, the phone rang. It was Principal Hargrove. In a tone that mixed disapproval with a nauseating air of smug satisfaction, he informed them that Alex had been seen in lewd conduct on school grounds. He expressed concern for Alex's well-being and future, suggesting that the family might benefit from a specialized rehabilitation program. The principal painted it as a chance to correct the deviance and restore the Carter family's good name. Desperate for a quick solution and reeling from the 1-2 punch of discovering Alex's sexuality and gender identity, Margaret and Thomas Carter latched onto the idea like drowning sailors grasping for a life preserver. Within the hour, the entire course of Alex's life was decided, with no input from Alex himself. By the time the phone call ended, Principal Hargrove had also spoken to the school board, and the wheels were in motion. The next day, Alex arrived at Westwood High, dreading the stares and whispered conversations. He found a hastily arranged meeting in the principal's office. Hargrove sat behind his desk, face blank with a veneer of false compassion. "Your parents agree that you need help," he said, "and we have just the place for that." Alex attempted to protest. "My life isn't up to you," he snapped, heart pounding against his ribs. But the principal only offered a thin-lipped smile, as though he knew precisely how powerless Alex was in that moment. "This will be for your own good, Alex," Principal Hargrove intoned. "You'll be enrolled in a reputable center that specializes in guiding confused teens back to the right path." In the bleak corridor outside the office, Alex felt a chill that had nothing to do with the school's air conditioning. He realized with horrifying clarity that his private moment with Jamie was just the tip of the iceberg. This entire town, with its rigid moral codes, was prepared to systematically crush anyone who strayed from its narrow definition of what was normal. Fear came first, an all-encompassing sensation that made the air feel too thick to breathe. The van that transported Alex away from Westwood High arrived in the dead of night, as though those in charge of the rehabilitation program were eager to minimize any public scrutiny. The windows were tinted to near opacity, and the two attendants who escorted Alex wore expressions of neutral detachment. One was an older man with a trimmed white beard, the other was a woman with stern features. Neither addressed Alex with any warmth or courtesy. Alex barely had time to say goodbye to his parents, not that his mother or father seemed interested in a heartfelt parting. Margaret Carter's goodbye was an averted gaze, lips pinched. Thomas Carter's farewell was a single word "go," delivered with all the tenderness of a slammed door. En route, the van passed through quiet suburban streets and eventually long stretches of open road, leaving the familiar behind. Alex stared down at trembling hands, noting the chipped black nail polish. He thought of Jamie, the softness of his smile, the laughter they shared. A longing ache sank into his chest, almost unbearable in its intensity. After hours on the road, the center loomed in the distance, lit by floodlights that outlined tall fences and imposing buildings. A sign at the gated entrance read, "The New Dawn Rehabilitation Center." A second sign threatened intruders with prosecution for trespassing. Alex felt his stomach knot, the foreboding sense that this was not a place of healing. The intake process was swift, impersonal, and humiliating. Security guards confiscated his few personal items, phone, wallet, even the necklace Jamie had given him. They handed him a set of shapeless clothes and led him down a corridor lined with metal doors. Through these doors, Alex could hear muffled voices, sometimes sobs, rarely laughter. Eventually, they deposited him in a small room where a nurse asked a rapid series of questions. Asterisk, any existing medical conditions. Asterisk, allergies. Asterisk, history of mental illness. Alex answered numbly, aware that each response would be catalogued and filed, possibly used against him. The nurse's face was carefully blank, as if she'd been trained not to react. After the questionnaire, Dr. Evelyn Graves, the head of the program, made her first appearance. She walked with a stride full of authority, her dark hair pinned back in a severe bun. Her eyes carried a clinical chill, and when she spoke, her voice was smooth and unwavering. "Welcome to the new dawn," she said with no warmth whatsoever. "Here, we believe in helping young people find their true selves. We will guide you, Alex, toward a better life." Her words dripped with a kind of sanctimonious condescension that made Alex's skin crawl. He struggled to maintain eye contact, partly out of defiance and partly because every instinct warned him to tread carefully. Moments later, Dr. Graves outlined the protocols. "We'll begin by reinforcing your new identity, Emily. That is who you are here. That is who you will become." A single sentence, and yet it shattered something in Alex. He had quietly yearned to present as a woman, but on his own terms, in his own time. Now, the forced transformation robbed him of any agency in that process. "You can't just decide for me," he said, voice cracking with anger and fear. "But we can," Dr. Graves replied, calm and cold. "Your parents have signed the necessary permission. We'll ensure you receive hormone treatments, psychological guidance, and an environment that encourages proper femininity. You'll learn grace, poise, and respect. Failure to comply will result in consequences." The severity in her tone conjured a sinking realization. The entire center was built on the premise of compliance. They had the legal documentation, the medical staff, and the security measures to enforce everything they deemed necessary. This was no idle threat. The next few days were a blur of orientation sessions. Alex learned the daily schedule: early morning hormone injections, counseling sessions in sterile white rooms, forced group activities like needlework or cooking activities Dr. Graves insisted were essential for cultivating Emily's natural grace. Lectures hammered in the ideals of traditional femininity, twisting them into a rigid doctrine that demanded submission and docility. The staff insisted it was for your own good. Emotionally, Alex began to unravel. The confusion was overwhelming. On one hand, the hormones introduced to his body sparked a bittersweet sensation. This was, at some level, what he'd wanted for years: to experience his body aligning closer with his identity as a woman. Yet the entire process was overshadowed by the grim reality that it was forced upon him without choice, in a place where compliance was the only currency of survival. Isolation compounded the torment. The center allowed no phone calls, no internet access, and no letters that weren't heavily monitored. Jamie's absence gnawed at Alex's sanity. He had no way to know if Jamie was okay, or if rumors had ruined his life back in Westwood. Alex felt trapped in a perpetual twilight of enforced transformation. At night, sleepless and cold in a narrow bed, Alex would wonder if there was any sliver of his old self left untainted. He thought about the day he might stand on his own 2 feet as a woman by choice, not because a group of strangers dictated it. On those sleepless nights, anger mingled with despair, forging an emotional cocktail that left him trembling beneath the center's scratchy blankets. One afternoon, a slip of unexpected kindness interrupted the monotony. Another patient, a quiet girl named Lee, slipped Alex a handwritten note during a counseling break. The message was simple: "I believe you. I see you. Don't lose hope." Alex clung to those words with a desperation that was almost painful, proof that not everyone here had been brainwashed into submission. Yet even the comfort of that note carried an undercurrent of fear, because it confirmed what Alex suspected: any form of rebellion or solidarity among patients was dangerous. The staff's watchful eyes were everywhere. Cameras in the hallways, security checks at every exit, and a strict schedule that allowed minimal downtime. Even mealtimes involved psychological conditioning. Dr. Graves would deliver thinly veiled lectures on gender roles, while patients were forced to practice proper posture and mannerisms. The emotional weight of it all threatened to suffocate Alex. There were brief flickers of defiance, moments when the staff barked an order, and Alex would hesitate before complying, clinging to a shred of dignity. But each act of defiance was met with swift correction: extra hours in isolation, an extended hormone therapy session, or a humiliating display where Alex was forced to recite mantras about embracing Emily's proper place. Still, Alex's spirit had not been fully broken. A quiet ember of rebellion glowed beneath the fear. He felt it whenever he remembered Jamie or the life he wanted on the outside. He felt it in each stolen glance at another patient's equally haunted eyes. That ember kept him from giving in completely, fueling a silent vow. One day, I will be free. One day, I will escape this place and live on my own terms. The corridors of the New Dawn Rehabilitation Center were a testament to clinical sterility. Harsh fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting elongated shadows on the speckled linoleum floors. White walls, white ceilings, white uniforms. It was as though someone believed that color was the enemy of conformity. This monochrome environment disoriented Alex, heightening the sense that he was trapped in a surreal labyrinth. The place smelled of antiseptic and suppressed humanity. Every door looked the same, each labeled with a cryptic code: B14, C22, and so on. Occasionally, while being marched to a therapy session, Alex glimpsed the interior of another room: patients lying on beds attached to IV drips or huddled in corners, rocking back and forth. A few stared blankly at the ceiling, their expressions drained of hope. In the recreation hall, an ironic name for a space that felt anything but recreational, several patients sat in neat rows, heads bowed as they worked on sewing projects, tablecloths, dresses, and doll outfits. The staff insisted this was a wholesome, feminine pastime, something that would help Emily find her place in the world. The repetitive motion of needle threading, of fabric slipping through Alex's fingers, became a slow drip of despair. Was it any wonder that a few of the patients had begun to look vacant, as if they'd forfeited whatever fight once lived in them? But it wasn't just the environment that hammered away at Alex's psyche. It was also the invasive technology the New Dawn employed. Dr. Graves called it virtual scenario reinforcement. Large devices reminiscent of old VR headsets sat in a special lab, attached to computers that pulsed with a sickly green glow. Twice a week, Alex and other high-risk patients were strapped into these devices. A swirl of digital landscapes replaced their field of vision, transporting them into hyper-realistic simulations, each carefully designed to reinforce feminine submission. In one scenario, Alex found himself in a picture-perfect suburban home, wearing a pastel dress and greeting an imaginary husband at the door. The simulation compelled him to cook dinner, to keep the house spotless, to smile demurely. A disembodied voice gently chided him if he didn't perform every action correctly, measuring success by the angle of his posture, the pitch of his voice, and the docility of his manner. The images were so vivid that Alex sometimes caught himself questioning where reality ended and the simulation began. It was a violation of the deepest kind, an attempt to reshape his identity, not just physically with hormones, but mentally through a forced rewriting of his self-image. After each session, Alex stumbled out drenched in sweat, a nauseating headache throbbing behind his eyes. An uneasy darkness filled the corners of the New Dawn that the staff never spoke of. If a patient resisted too aggressively or asked the wrong questions, they would suddenly vanish, their bed empty the next morning. Rumors abounded about hidden wings in the facility basement levels or locked upper floors where those considered irreparable were taken. The staff offered no explanations. Their only response to inquiries was a stern reminder that the center was a place of healing. It was during one of these VR sessions that a peculiar glitch occurred. The simulated pastel kitchen flickered, replaced by a pixelated corridor, and Alex saw a figure, a young man with haunted eyes staring at him. For a fleeting moment, a voice broke through the static. "They're erasing us. If you fight back, you disappear." The voice faded, the simulation stuttering back to the perfect suburban facade. But that momentary glitch confirmed Alex's worst suspicions. There were others here who wanted to resist, who recognized the center for the sinister machine it was. When Alex finally unstrapped from the VR headset, Dr. Graves loomed over him. "How did you find that scenario?" she asked, her voice clipped. "You seemed unsettled." Alex swallowed hard, forcing an even tone. "It was just intense," he managed. "It's a lot to process." Her eyes narrowed, studying his reaction. For a heartbeat, Alex feared she knew about the glitch, that perhaps she'd orchestrated it to test him. But after a tense silence, she merely gave a curt nod and scribbled a note on her clipboard. Outside of the VR sessions, Alex tried to keep his head down, waiting for another chance to glean information. One afternoon, while retrieving laundry from a back hallway, he'd bumped into a young man around his age. The man's ID badge read Ryan. His face was pinched with worry, but the moment he saw Alex's hesitant glance, a flicker of recognition lit his expression. "You're Alex," Ryan whispered. "I saw you in a simulation. My VR glitched once too." He glanced around to ensure no one was eavesdropping. "Look, be careful. They can break your mind if you're not careful." Alex stared, trying to piece together a million questions. How long have you been here?" Ryan swallowed. "Long enough to see some terrible things. I tried to escape once. Ended up in solitary for a month." A wave of nausea and hope coalesced in Alex's stomach. There was an ally here, someone who understood the reality of the new dawn. "We need to get out," Alex whispered. "We can't survive like this." Before they could say more, footsteps echoed down the corridor. They separated quickly, each feigning interest in some menial task. But a small ember of solidarity flared in Alex's chest. The center wasn't impenetrable, and there were others who yearned for freedom. That night, Alex tossed and turned, mind racing with images of the center's bleak hallways, the VR simulations, and the chilling notion that resisting could lead to an even darker fate. Sleep brought nightmares. Dr. Grace's face loomed like a specter, her lips whispering, "Submit or vanish." During a routine medical exam, Alex noticed subtle changes in his body. Softer skin, a slightly altered distribution of body fat, minor changes to muscle tone. These were the results of the hormone regimen. While a part of him recognized these changes as steps toward the feminine identity he privately craved, the overshadowing fact was that it was all forced upon him in the cruelest of contexts. The dissonance ripped at his psyche, leaving him perched between a sense of alien relief and overwhelming violation. The forced uniforms were another form of calculated humiliation, slightly more form-fitting tops, docile colors like pastel blues and pinks, modest skirts for certain training sessions. The staff demanded complete participation, chastising any sign of reluctance. Even the bathrooms were segregated by staff assignment, ensuring that patients had minimal chances to collude or plan. Yet the spirit of resistance burned brighter with each new emotional wound. Alex quietly memorized the layout, taking mental notes of which doors were alarmed, which hallways have cameras. He discovered that, in the far corner of the recreational area, there was a locked storage closet that seemed rarely used. He guessed it might be a potential hideout or a staging area if any plan to escape took shape. In the midst of all this, he also wrestled with a wrenching longing for Jamie. If only he could see his face one more time, or hear a comforting word. That longing felt dangerously distracting, like an open wound that refused to heal. But it also served as an anchor, reminding Alex of a life worth fighting for. Word travels fast in place of confinement, even when every conversation is monitored. Within a week, several other patients discreetly signaled to Alex and Ryan that they wanted out. Some flicked subtle glances in group therapy sessions. Others slipped short notes under dorm room doors. Each communication added threads to a growing underground network of defiance. Ironically, the suffocating rules and daily humiliations accelerated this sense of solidarity. Dr. Graves likely realized that the more oppressive the regime, the more desperately its prisoners would unite. Yet the staff's vigilant watch made any conspiracy perilous. Cameras in hallways, routine bed checks, random searches. It felt like the center was set up as a well-oiled machine specifically designed to crush rebellion. Every day brought a new layer of tension. Patients who murmured too loudly in the cafeteria were relocated to solitary. One rebellious patient, Piper, publicly refused to attend a VR session. The following morning, Piper's bed lay empty, her belongings vanished. A hush fell over the dormitory. Her fate remained unknown, a whispered cautionary tale. Resist too openly, and you might never be heard from again. Despite the risk, Alex and Ryan pressed on, forging a plan in whatever scraps of privacy they could find. In hushed voices over the hiss of a broken radiator, they discussed the center's shift changes, the timing of security patrols, and the code patterns on the locked doors. They agreed on a single, unwavering objective: a mass escape. The key, they believed, was to strike fast and hard, to overwhelm the staff's carefully balanced system of control. Perhaps they could sabotage the security cameras, cause a power outage, and slip away in the resulting chaos. The critical piece of information they lacked was what lay beyond the perimeter fence. The staff always transported new arrivals under heavy guard. The rumors suggested there were motion detectors, floodlights, and even armed guards patrolling the outskirts. As days boiled into weeks, each moment pulsed with dread. When Dr. Graves or her subordinates called a patient's name, everyone tensed, uncertain whether it signified a routine therapy session or a condemnation to the center's rumored secret rooms. When it was Alex's turn, he forced himself to remain outwardly calm, bracing for whatever new torment they might dream up. In one particularly harrowing session, Dr. Graves confronted Alex with photos from his former life images that must have been taken from social media or old yearbooks. She laid them out like evidence on a table. Alex dressed in typical teenage clothes, wearing a scowl that concealed deeper insecurities. "This is who you think you are," Dr. Graves said softly, "but this is not who you were meant to be." She produced a mirror and thrust it toward Alex. "Look, see Emily, the person you're becoming. Doesn't she look more natural?" Alex's reflection showed subtle changes: softer cheeks, a hint of rounding at the hips. The forced hormone therapy was taking root. It might have been a moment of quiet affirmation under different circumstances. Here, it felt like a betrayal of self. Any sense of beauty was tainted by the cruelty that had brought it into being. "Let me go," Alex whispered, voice trembling. "You have no right to keep me here." Dr. Gray's response was a chilly laugh. "Your parents gave us every right." Then she leaned in, her perfume a sharp tang in Alex's nostrils. "Make no mistake, if you don't cooperate, you'll end up where the others have gone. Nobody questions them anymore." The threat hung in the air, acidic and undeniable. Outside that therapy room, tension rippled among the other patients. Many were afraid to even make eye contact with Alex, worried they'd be implicated if he were caught planning something. But a few courageous souls, Lee, who had once slipped him a note, and Jordan, a patient forced into a caricatured masculine role, quietly offered support. In the cloak of night, the conspirators whispered in a small cleaning closet next to the laundry room, the air thick with detergent fumes. Ryan sketched a rough map of the facility on a piece of stolen paper. He marked potential exit points and guessed where the power lines might be. The plan was precarious. They needed a diversion big enough to draw the majority of the guards and staff to one location. Disabling the power grid, even temporarily, would kill the cameras and alarms long enough for them to slip through the fence. Once on the other side, they'd scatter, ensuring at least some would escape if others were recaptured. Time pressed in on them. Every day in the new dawn eroded hope, replaced it with fear, and threatened to break their spirits. More patients vanished, some rumored to have graduated the program, others quietly rumored to have been taken to darker corners of the facility. Alex's nightmares grew increasingly vivid. Images of Dr. Graves orchestrating advanced VR scenarios, illusions of a life as Emily in a nuclear family that existed only in twisted digital worlds. One tension-filled afternoon, Alex and Ryan managed to sneak into a staff-only corridor by timing a nurse's smoke break. Their hearts hammered as they tiptoed past an unguarded station. Alex's pulse rolled in his ears, the adrenaline making it hard to focus on which door led where. He could almost smell the fear on Ryan, They kept glancing over his shoulder. At the end of the corridor, they found a locked door labeled electrical. Ryan fiddled with the handle, but it refused to budge. Alex crouched, scanning the door's edges, noticing a metal keypad. They'd need a code. They didn't have one. They retreated before they could be discovered, but that short excursion yielded valuable intel. The power system was indeed hidden behind a locked door, presumably heavily guarded. If they could find the code or sabotage the lock, they'd be one step closer to freedom. It was also a stark reminder of the constant danger. One slip-up and they'd both vanish. Dr. Graves had made it perfectly clear that dissidents had no place within the center's pristine walls. Night fell. The plan was nearly complete on paper, but it needed a catalyst, an event, to mask their sabotage. That catalyst arrived in an unexpected form. During a group therapy session, Jordan snapped. The pressure of enforced masculinity, the humiliating tasks, and the fear of disappearing finally drove him to a meltdown. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "I am who I am. You can't change me." Then he flipped a table, scattering papers and pitchers of water. In the ensuing chaos, staff members raced to subdue Jordan. Dr. Graves hurried out of her office, flanked by 2 guards, shouting orders. The scene was immediate pandemonium enough that Alex and Ryan locked eyes across the room. This was the perfect distraction, an opening provided by raw emotion rather than careful planning. Seizing the moment, they slipped away from the main hall, hearts pounding. Ryan had snagged a stolen keycard from a nurse days before. They sprinted down the corridor toward the staff-only section, praying this card would grant them access. Their lungs burned by the time they reached the electrical door. Ryan swiped the keycard. A blinking red light indicated a failed read. He tried again, jiggling the card with sweaty fingers. Still red. Fear twisted in Alex's gut. They had seconds, maybe less, before a guard realized they were gone. On the 3rd try, the light turned green and the door clicked open. Inside, machinery hummed. Rows of circuit breakers and fuse boxes lined the walls. Ryan grabbed a piece of metal piping from the floor, raising it like a weapon. "We kill the lights, we kill the cameras," he said, voice trembling but resolute. With a swift swing, he smashed the main breaker. Sparks flew, and the overhead lights instantly flickered to darkness. Alarms began to blare, the wail a high-pitched shriek that reverberated through the building. For a moment, time seemed to freeze in the aftershock of the lights going out. Then everything lurched into motion. Sirens howled from every corner of the New Dawn Rehabilitation Center, echoing a mechanical panic that matched the patient's collective heartbeat. Shadows danced on the walls in the flicker of red emergency bulbs. Alex and Ryan emerged from the electrical room and darted into the main corridor, the alarm's shriek making it impossible to think clearly. Doors slammed open. Guards hollered at the top of their lungs, and staff members scrambled in all directions. Some patients, emboldened by the sudden darkness, rushed into the hall, eyes wild with a mix of terror and hope. Others cowered in rooms, too afraid to risk the unknown. Lee, the quiet girl who'd once offered Alex words of encouragement, appeared at the corridor junction, breathless. "The fence's some sections might not have power now," she shouted over the sirens. "We might be able to climb." Jordan, the patient whose emotional outburst had sparked the initial chaos, staggered into view. His face was bruised from the scuffle with guards, but he carried a determined light in his eyes. "This way," he barked, gesturing down the hallway that led toward the cafeteria, and beyond it, a side exit. In that moment, the ragtag group formed without formal agreement. Alex, Ryan, Lee, Jordan, and a handful of others. They sprinted through the corridor in unison, ducking into doorways whenever a roving flashlight beam cut across the darkness. The siren's blare seemed to intensify, as if warning them that time was running out. They reached the cafeteria, where the faint glow of emergency lights revealed rows of upturned chairs and tables. Discarded dinner trays littered the floor, evidence of an abruptly interrupted meal. A single guard stood near the exit door, frantically fiddling with his radio, which sputtered uselessly in the power outage. Spotting the group, the guard yelled for backup, fumbling for the stun baton at his waist. Without hesitation, Jordan tackled him. A brief scuffle ensued, grunts, a cry of pain, until Jordan wrestled the baton away, delivering a decisive blow that rendered the guard unconscious. Panting, Jordan motioned for everyone to keep moving. "He'll be out for a few minutes, tops. We've got to go." They'd burst through the exit door onto the center's grounds. A bitter nighttime wind whipped across Alex's face, bringing the scent of pine and damp earth. Floodlights still illuminated sections of the perimeter fence, but entire swaths blinked and sputtered in the partial blackout. The wail of alarms continued, echoing into the open air. "There," Lee shouted, pointing to a portion of the fence cloaked in darkness. Some overhead lamps had lost power entirely, and the fence's electronic security might also be offline. But the yard was vast, and the watchtowers were active, spotlights sweeping the area. The group stuck to the shadows along the building's walls, hearts hammering so loudly they could hardly hear themselves think. Any moment now, reinforcements could pour out of the center's main doors. They reached the fence, which stood at least 10 feet high, topped with curled razor wire. Ryan cursed under his breath, scanning for any weaknesses. They found a cluster of stacked wooden pallets near a maintenance shed enough to make a rough platform. Wordlessly, they moved the pallets to create a makeshift ladder. Jordan climbed first, grimacing as he hauled himself up and tried to push aside the razor wire with a piece of broken wood. Sparks flew where the wire tangles jerked against metal supports. Lee went next, boosted by Ryan. She yelped as the wire nicked her forearm, drawing blood. Then, precariously, she swung her legs over and dropped to the other side, landing in a muffled thud. It was Alex's turn. Muscles burning, adrenaline screaming, he scrambled up the pallets. The second rung collapsed under his weight, and he nearly tumbled backward, but Jordan caught his arm in time. Panting, Alex reached the top, the menacing wire glinting in the dim strobe of emergency lights. He grabbed the piece of wood Jordan offered, using it to press down the wire just enough to squeeze through. Pain lanced through his palm as a barb snagged him. He bit down on his lip to avoid crying out. With one last push, Alex swung over the fence and dropped, hitting the ground with a jolt that rattled his teeth. For half a second, he lay there in the grass, the sky above him swirling with chaos. Then Ryan followed suit, landing a short distance away, knees buckling. Shouts rang out behind them. The center's security had arrived in force, flashlights bobbing like angry fireflies near the base of the fence. A guard shouted, "Stop." Another fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of the gun echoed across the compound. In that heart-stopping moment, Alex faced a critical choice: break into an all-out sprint for the tree-line safety possibly within reach, or turn back to help the next patient still struggling on the fence. He saw Jordan on top, grappling with the wire. A guard grabbed Jordan's leg from inside the fence, attempting to pull him back. On instinct, Alex scrambled up from the grass and dove for Jordan's arm, reaching through the fence. The wire tore into his forearm, drawing a hot streak of pain, but he held tight. Ryan, seeing the struggle, grabbed a fallen branch and whacked the guard's hand through the chain link. The guard let go with a yelp. Jordan toppled to the ground on the outside, biting his lip to stifle a shout of pain. Another patient flung themselves over next, twisting an ankle upon landing, but hobbling away with grim determination. The rest scattered into the darkness like frightened deer. Shots fired again, accompanied by furious shouting. The group sprinted across the field toward a thick cluster of trees. Alex's lungs screamed for air. Every footstep pounded like a drumbeat. But at last, they stumbled into the cover of the woods, hearts pounding so violently they could hardly stand. They didn't dare stop. Even as they panted, injured and exhausted, they pressed further into the thicket. Branches snapped underfoot, starlight flickered through the canopy, and every howl of wind sounded like the approach of pursuit. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, they paused. Some had collapsed, tears of relief or pain streaking their faces. Jordan swore under his breath, holding his bruised ribs. Lee clutched her bleeding arm. Ryan leaned against a tree, trembling. Alex sank to his knees, pressing a palm against his own throbbing forearm, where the wire had sliced deep. They were free, but now what? A distant siren still wailed from the direction of the new dawn, occasionally punctuated by flashes of searchlights sweeping the tree line. The group needed to move, needed to find help or get to a place where they could hide. No one spoke for several moments, each lost in their own swirl of emotion. Relief, fear, anguish, hope, uncertainty, the entire spectrum collided in the hush of that forest clearing. Finally, Ryan spoke. "We have to keep going, or they'll find us. We can't stop now." Alex nodded. "We'll head for the nearest town. Someone has to help us. We need to expose them." Lee's face twisted with doubt. What if a town's in on it? What if no one believes us? A dark silence followed. They had all considered that possibility. In a place as conservative as Westwood, where Principal Hargrove's morally rigid stance held sway, it was entirely possible that the new dawn had allies beyond its walls. "We'll find someone," Alex said softly, swallowing his dread. "We have to." Sticking together, they navigated the woods under a moonlit sky, forging a makeshift path toward what they hoped was civilization. Hours later, they emerged near a rural highway. The group decided to split into smaller clusters to avoid attracting attention. Alex, Ryan, and Lee stayed together, while Jordan and the others took a different route. If one group was caught, perhaps another might survive to tell the story. At dawn, as pale sunlight crept over the horizon, Alex's trio reached a gas station on the outskirts of a small town. They must have looked like ghosts, dirty, battered, eyes sunken with sleepless trauma. The gas station clerk stared wide-eyed as they stumbled in. Ryan took a shaky breath and tried to explain. "We were being held. They tortured us." It took some convincing before the clerk relented, offering a phone. Alex dialed a crisis hotline he recalled from earlier research, voice shaking as he explained the barest details. Within an hour, an ambulance arrived, followed by local authorities. But the final blow came when they realized who the local authorities were, men who seemed polite but guarded. Their questions carried a note of skepticism, almost as though they'd been prepped to dismiss anything they heard about the new dawn. The tension flared once again, especially when Dr. Gray's name was mentioned. Lee's bruised arms and the group's physical injuries were impossible to ignore, however. A paramedic urged them to go to the hospital for evaluation. The authorities, seemingly uncertain how to proceed, accompanied them. In the hospital's cramped waiting room, Alex refused to let go of Ryan's hand. They needed each other's presence to anchor them in this swirl of potential betrayal. A glimmer of hope arrived in the form of an independent journalist named Serena Nichols, who had caught wind of rumors about the new dawn. She came to the hospital with a notepad and camera, determined to document what the runaways had to say. Emboldened by her genuine empathy, Alex began to share everything: the forced hormone therapy, the VR simulations, the patients who vanished. Tears fell as he recounted the final mad dash over the fence. Serena listened, face grim. "People need to hear this. I promise. I'll do what I can to get the story out." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of statements, medical exams, and media exposure. Once the story leaked, Westwood found itself at the center of a public outcry that reverberated beyond Ohio. Investigative teams swarmed the new dawn, unearthing sinister details: shady funding from extremist groups, clandestine disposal of patient records, and evidence of abuse that no one could ignore. Even Principal Hargrove felt the heat, facing accusations of facilitating illegal surveillance and funneling vulnerable teens into a predatory system. Yet despite the center's downfall, an even more unsettling revelation emerged. The New Dawn was part of a broader network calling itself the Mirror Alliance, connected to other facilities across state lines. Dr. Graves, indicted but released on bail, disappeared days before her court date, fueling rumors that she had simply relocated to continue her work elsewhere. For Alex, the months that followed were a maelstrom of legal battles, therapy sessions, and the fight to reclaim autonomy. He openly embraced his identity as Emily, a name he now chose for himself, not because anyone forced it upon him. Media outlets clamored for interviews, but Emily was cautious, deeply scarred by the violation of privacy she'd endured. Still, she found purpose in activism. Teaming up with advocates and survivors, Emily spoke passionately at rallies and universities, highlighting the dangers of forced rehabilitation. Her voice carried the weight of first-hand experience, and people listened. On a crisp, sunlit day, Emily stood at a podium in front of a modest crowd in Columbus, Ohio. An array of handmade signs dotted the audience. End conversion camps. Identity is not a crime. No more secrets. Cameras flashed, and news vans lined the curb. She took a breath, recalling every moment of agony inside the new dawn. "They tried to break me," she said into the microphone, voice steady. "But in trying to force me into their ideal, they showed me the strength of my own truth. I stand here today not as someone who was cured of an imaginary illness, but as someone who survived an injustice." The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of support that coursed through her. Looking across the sea of faces, she saw Ryan and Lee standing side by side, offering encouraging smiles. She spotted Jordan, his arm in a sling, nodding in solidarity. Each of them bore scars, both visible and hidden. They were living testaments to resilience, to the power of unity in the face of tyranny. As the applause subsided, Emily continued, voice tinged with quiet determination. No one should ever have their identity dictated by another. No one should be forced to reflect only what society demands. We deserve to be the mirrors of our own truth, not the forced reflection of another's design. When the rally concluded, Emily felt a gentle vibration in her phone, an unlisted number. The text message read, "Was still watching. The new dawn isn't gone. Stay vigilant." A chill wound its way through her spine, a reminder that the beast they had wounded was not yet dead. Still, she lifted her gaze to the bright sky, to the new day that seemed to open countless possibilities. Whatever comes, she thought, I won't face it alone, and I won't face it in silence.